I'll tell you a story that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. It was the summer of 2017, and 4 of my closest friends and I decided to embark on a challenging hiking trip in the remote wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. We were experienced hikers, having tackled various trails in the past, but little did we know that this adventure would push us to our limits and beyond. Our destination was a lesser-known trail deep within the Olympic National Forest. It promised stunning vistas, untouched wilderness, and a sense of isolation that drew us like a moth to a flame. Armed with topographic maps, compasses, and enough supplies to last us a week, we set off on our journey, confident that we could handle whatever challenges the wilderness threw our way. The first few days were nothing short of spectacular. We marveled at the towering trees, the crystal-clear streams, and the sense of tranquility that enveloped us. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the occasional bird call. Our cell phones, though useless for communication, served as cameras to capture the breathtaking beauty of our surroundings. But on the 4th day, as we ventured deeper into the forest, a creeping unease began to settle over us. It started with the subtlest of changes, an odd-shaped rock formation that we couldn't find on our map, a tree that seemed out of place. We brushed it off initially, chalking it up to the complexities of navigating in unfamiliar terrain. As the day wore on, however, it became apparent that we had lost our way. The trail markers, which had been a reliable guide, seemed to vanish into thin air. Panic began to set in as we realized that we had no cell signal to call for help. We were well and truly on our own. The sense of isolation grew with each passing hour. Our once confident strides became hesitant, and the camaraderie that had sustained us in the beginning now felt strained. We set up camp for the night, our conversations turning from excited chatter to worried whispers. In the days that followed, we desperately tried to retrace our steps, but the forest seemed to have other plans. It was as if the very landscape had shifted, rearranging itself to confound our efforts. The dense canopy of trees blocked out the sun, making it impossible to determine direction, and our compasses spun wildly, as if mocking our attempts at navigation. Our hands, raw from the cold, trembled as we struggled to melt snow and ice for drinking water. Filtering the frigid liquid through makeshift cloth filters offered little comfort, as we watched our dwindling fuel supply threaten to extinguish the only source of warmth in our icy fortress. The Arctic nights stretched on endlessly, each one longer and more harrowing than the last. As the darkness pressed in on us, a palpable tension settled over our makeshift camp. We huddled together in our trailers, the cold seeping through the walls, and the dim emergency lights casting eerie shadows. It was during those long, tense nights that we began to suspect we were not alone in this frozen wasteland. Whispers of movement outside our trailers sent shivers down our spines, and the sound of footsteps in the snow became a haunting refrain. We dared not speak of the unexplainable phenomena that plagued us, fearing that acknowledging them would make them all the more real. The atmosphere grew thick with dread, and our sanity teetered on the precipice of madness. In the inky blackness of the Arctic night, we strained our ears for any sign of what lurked beyond our fragile sanctuary. The wilderness had become an enigmatic and malevolent force, and the isolation weighed on our minds like a suffocating blanket. We would hear rustling in the underbrush, soft footsteps in the dead of night, and the sensation of being watched. We dismissed it as our imagination playing tricks on us, but as the days turned into a week, there was no denying that something was out there in the wilderness with us. Our discussions became more paranoid, with wild theories about who or what could be stalking us. Maybe it was a group of hikers who had also lost their way, or perhaps it was a park ranger checking on us from a distance. But the unease remained, and it was clear that our imaginations were running wild. One evening, as we huddled around our dwindling campfire, we heard it, an eerie, low-pitched howl that seemed to reverberate through the trees. It was a sound unlike anything we had ever heard before, a haunting, primal cry that sent a shiver down our collective spine. The hair on the back of our necks stood on end, and our breaths caught in our throats. We exchanged nervous glances, our faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. The howl persisted, growing louder and more unsettling with each passing second. It was a sound that defied explanation, resonating with a deep, primal fear that tapped into the very core of our beings. Our survival instincts kicked into high gear, and we scrambled to our feet, our eyes scanning the shadowy perimeter of our camp. Fear gnawed at our resolve, and a sense of vulnerability washed over us like an icy tide. We clung to one another, our breaths visible in the cold, as the howl continued its eerie chorus. The very ground beneath us seemed to tremble in response, amplifying the sense of dread that hung heavy in the air. We fumbled for our flashlights, casting weak beams into the inky blackness, desperate for any sign of the source of that unearthly cry. Our hearts hammered in our chests, and a feeling of being hunted consumed us. That night, we barely slept, our anxiety mounting with each passing hour. As the days stretched on, we continued to hear the strange howling, always just beyond the edge of our campfire's glow. It was as if something was toying with us, letting us know that it was there, watching, waiting. Despite our fear, we pressed on, knowing that our only chance of survival was to find our way back to civilization. We marked our path with makeshift trail markers and left notes in the hope that someone would find them. Every step we took, we felt the weight of the forest bearing down on us, as if it was actively working against our escape. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we stumbled upon a trail marker that we recognized. It was a moment of pure elation, the realization that we were on the right path back to safety. We followed the markers with renewed determination, and as the forest gradually began to thin, we knew that our ordeal was coming to an end. When we emerged from the wilderness, dirty, disheveled, and exhausted, we were met by a search and rescue team who had been alerted by our notes and trail markers. We were saved, but the sense of unease, of being watched, lingered long after we had left the forest behind. To this day, we have no explanation for what happened during those harrowing days in the Pacific Northwest wilderness. It was an experience that tested our limits, both physically and mentally, and left us with a lingering sense of dread that we could never fully shake. We may never know who or what was out there with us, but one thing is certain, we will never forget the terror of being lost and hunted in the unforgiving heart of the wilderness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dense forest, my family and I were settling into our campsite in the heart of the Allegheny National Forest. It was supposed to be a weekend of nature, relaxation, and quality time together, a much-needed break from the chaos of everyday life. We had chosen a secluded spot, far away from the hustle and bustle of the main campgrounds. Surrounded by towering trees and the soothing sounds of a nearby creek, it felt like our own little slice of paradise. The crisp mountain air filled our lungs as we set up our tents and gathered around the campfire. My wife, Sarah, was busy preparing dinner, while our two kids, Emily and Ben, played tag in the fading daylight. Laughter echoed through the forest, and for a while, it felt like nothing could disturb our perfect weekend getaway. But that idyllic bubble was shattered the following morning when we noticed something was terribly wrong. As we sat around the campfire, sipping coffee and planning our day's activities, we couldn't help but notice the eerie silence that enveloped our surroundings. The cheerful chirping of birds had been replaced by an unsettling stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I dismissed it as a trick of the mind, a result of my overactive imagination. It was only when we decided to take a hike along a nearby trail that our unease grew. We had heard there were other campers in the vicinity, but as we ventured deeper into the forest, we realized that the usually well-trodden path had become overgrown and untamed. It was as if no one had passed this way in weeks. As we continued along the trail, our anxiety deepened. We found abandoned campsites, tents left half-collapsed, and smoldering campfires still emitting a faint wisp of smoke. It was clear that something had happened here, something that had driven the previous campers away in a hurry. Our attempts to locate any signs of the missing campers proved futile. We called out their names, but our voices echoed through the forest without reply. It was as if they had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but their abandoned gear. Fear gnawed at the edges of our determination, but we pressed on, desperate to uncover the mystery behind the disappearances. Sarah tried to reassure the kids, but their once bright eyes now held a shadow of doubt. As the hours passed, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest seemed to close in around us, the towering trees casting long, ominous shadows. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs sent shivers down our spines. We decided to return to our campsite, hoping to find some answers or contact the authorities. But as we retraced our steps, we realized that the path we had taken had changed. It twisted and turned in unfamiliar ways, as if the forest itself was conspiring to keep us lost. Panic began to set in as we tried to make sense of our situation. Our cell phones, which had worked perfectly the day before, were now devoid of signal. We were cut off from the outside world, trapped in this wilderness with no way to call for help. That night, we huddled together in our tents, clutching our flashlights and listening to the haunting sounds of the forest. The distant howl of a coyote sent shivers down our spines, and the rustling of leaves outside seemed to take on an evil tone. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of foliage, was magnified in the stillness, heightening our fear to a fever pitch. We strained our ears, our senses on high alert, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something malevolent lurked just beyond the flimsy fabric of our tents. Our flashlight beams darted wildly at the slightest sound, searching for the source of our dread. We whispered to each other in hushed tones, trying to come up with a plan to escape this nightmare. The kids were scared, and Sarah and I were equally terrified. We had no idea what had happened to the other campers or who or what was stalking us in the darkness. As the hours dragged on, it became clear that we were not alone. We could hear faint footsteps outside our tents, soft whispers carried on the wind, and the sensation of being watched grew ever stronger. At one point, I summoned the courage to unzip the tent and shine my flashlight into the night. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. There, just beyond the edge of the beam of light, were eyes, glowing, eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. I yelled, and the rest of my family rushed to my side. But when we shone our flashlights into the night, whatever had been lurking in the shadows had vanished, leaving us with only the haunting memory of those eyes. We decided that we had to leave, to get out of this forest at any cost. With the first light of dawn, we packed up our camp in record time and began to hike back the way we had come. The forest seemed to resist our departure, with the path shifting and changing as if it didn't want us to leave. But we pressed on, determined to escape this nightmare. It took hours of trekking through the wilderness, but eventually, we stumbled upon a familiar trail marker. Relief washed over us as we followed the markers back to the main campground. When we finally reached the safety of civilization, we were exhausted, traumatized, and forever changed by our ordeal in the forest. We reported the disappearances of the other campers, but to this day, no one knows what happened to them. As for our family, we have no doubt that something sinister lurked in that forest, an unseen presence that watched our every move and drove us to the brink of terror. We may never know what it was or why it chose us, but one thing is certain, we'll never forget the dread-filled nights and the feeling of being hunted in the heart of the wilderness. The Arctic tundra stretched out before us, an unforgiving expanse of ice and snow that seemed to extend to the edge of eternity. Our research station, a cluster of insulated trailers and snow-covered antennas, stood as a lonely outpost in this desolation. It was a place few would willingly choose to spend their days, and yet, we were here, driven by our pursuit of scientific knowledge. I had assembled a team of brilliant minds, each an expert in their field, to study the effects of climate change on this remote corner of the Earth. Our station, nestled far from civilization, was meant to be a haven for scientific discovery. Instead, it became a crucible of isolation, testing the limits of our sanity. The months of darkness took a toll on our mental state, as the sun dipped below the horizon and plunged us into an endless night. The isolation weighed heavily on our shoulders, and the constant, bone-chilling cold seeped into our bones, making every moment a battle against the elements. As the lead scientist of the expedition, I felt the weight of responsibility for the team's well-being. I watched as paranoia and tension crept into our daily lives like an insidious disease. Simple disagreements turned into heated arguments, and the once amicable camaraderie among my colleagues began to fray. The first signs of trouble came in the form of strange noises that echoed through the frozen landscape. We would hear footsteps in the snow outside our trailers, but when we ventured out, we found nothing but pristine wilderness. The crunching of snow under unseen boots haunted our dreams, leaving us sleep-deprived and on edge. Then came the inexplicable power outages. Our station was equipped with state-of-the-art generators and backup systems, yet they would fail without warning, plunging us into darkness and forcing us to rely on emergency lights. We ran diagnostics, checked the fuel supply, and examined every wire and circuit, but we could find no logical explanation for the outages. Paranoia gnawed at our sanity. We turned our suspicions on each other, accusing one another of tampering with the equipment or sabotaging the mission. Trust eroded like the ice beneath our feet, and I found myself torn between the need to lead and the fear of mutiny. On one particularly frigid and desolate night, a night that felt as if the Arctic itself was closing in around our isolated research station, I lay in my bunk, wrapped in layers of clothing, my breath visible in the icy air. The relentless cold seemed to seep into my very bones, and the deafening silence of the polar night pressed upon my senses. In that haunting stillness, a voice, faint and ethereal, pierced the air, sending shivers coursing through my body. It was a voice unlike any I had ever heard before, a whisper carried on the wind, as if the very elements themselves conspired to deliver its chilling message. My heart pounded with a mixture of fear and curiosity. I wrapped myself in layers of clothing and ventured outside, scanning the snow-covered landscape with a flashlight. But there was no one to be seen, and the voice had vanished, leaving me alone in the freezing cold. I shared my experience with the team, hoping to find a rational explanation, but they only exchanged worried glances and avoided my gaze. It was as if they too had heard the voice but were too afraid to admit it. As the weeks passed, the phenomena intensified. Equipment malfunctioned with increasing frequency, and our communications with the outside world became sporadic at best. Our isolation deepened, and we felt as if we were marooned on an alien planet, cut off from civilization. One evening, as we gathered in the common area to discuss our findings, a piercing scream shattered the stillness of the Arctic night. We rushed outside, our breath forming clouds in the freezing air, and found one of our team members standing in the snow, trembling and wide-eyed. She claimed to have seen a figure in the darkness, a shadowy presence that moved silently among the trailers. We searched the area with flashlights and weapons drawn, but there was no sign of anyone else. The barren landscape stretched out in all directions, offering no hiding place. The incident left us shaken and terrified, and the atmosphere at the station became even more tense. We questioned our own sanity, wondering if the isolation and harsh conditions had finally taken their toll on our minds. But the events that followed defied any rational explanation. Objects would disappear from one moment to the next, only to reappear in inexplicable locations. The temperature inside the trailers would fluctuate wildly, with sudden drops that left us shivering in our sleep. Then, one day, a chilling discovery shattered what little remained of our fragile composure. I stumbled upon a set of footprints, stark against the pristine white of the tundra, leading away from the station and into the desolate wilderness. They were human footprints, unmistakable and eerie in their solitude. Intrigued and horrified in equal measure, we decided to follow these enigmatic tracks, hoping to unravel the mystery that had gripped our isolated outpost. We trudged through the snow, our breath forming frosty clouds in the frigid air, the relentless cold gnawing at our resolve. For miles we followed those footprints, etching a path through the unyielding expanse of the tundra. They seemed to lead us deeper into the heart of the wilderness, away from any semblance of civilization. But then, without warning, the tracks abruptly vanished. It was as if the person who had made them had simply evaporated into thin air, leaving behind no trace of their presence. We searched the surroundings meticulously, our hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and fascination, but there was no sign of where the tracks had ended or where their creator had gone. The desolation of the Arctic wilderness pressed in around us, its silence punctuated only by the eerie howling of the wind. It was a chilling reminder of our isolation, of the profound emptiness that surrounded us. Desperation gripped us, and we made the difficult decision to abandon our research station. We radioed for evacuation, and a team from the outside world was dispatched to retrieve us. As we waited for their arrival, we packed our equipment and prepared to leave behind the haunted tundra that had become our prison. But as we boarded the helicopter that would take us to safety, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were leaving something behind, something that defied explanation. The Arctic wilderness held its secrets close, and I knew that we were just one more enigma in the long history of this unforgiving land. Now, before we come back with brand new episodes for you, do subscribe to our channel Horror Talker. And share it with your friends and family. Until next time, stay awake and stay alert, because you never know.